Before we get started, we want to give a shout out to our newest patron, Nursey1975. Thank you for subscribing to us. I believe we're up to around 15 patrons now. And don't forget, when we get to 25, we're having that huge giveaway, 3 separate giveaways. So tell them where they can go, Jessica.
Our website, patron.podbean.com/Nurses Uncorked Podcast. And you can find out all the information you need about becoming a patron. I'm Nurse Jessica Seitz, along with Nurse Erica. We're Nurses Uncorked, the podcast that takes nursing facts with nursing comedy and makes a little cocktail out of it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Nurses Uncorked. I have Nurse Erica alongside me as always, and it's myself, Nurse Jessica Seitz. And today we have another duo podcasting, dynamic duo. That's the word I want to use with us today on the podcast. And we're super, super excited about that. We have today 2 lovely, strong women here. We have Amie Archibald-Varley, RN, and we also have Sara Fung, RN. They are both with a podcast that I love, that I've actually been checking out recently, called the Gritty Nurse Podcast. It's a very popular Canadian nursing podcast. And what's really cool, we're going to get into it in a little bit, they've recently published their first book, their own book, The Wisdom of Nurses. Yes. And they were gracious enough to give us one of those books when we saw them on the cruise recently. So they are public figures and nursing advocates. We love nursing advocates, so we're excited. Thank you, ladies, for coming on to Nurses Uncorked.
Thanks for having us. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. We have an extra guest. My microphone it's kind of funny. It's like my microphone's actually blocking the extra guest, but here she is. Hopefully she behaves. I'm not too sure. I'm a little skeptical, but we'll see.
Okay.
She's sleeping for now.
It's okay. Yeah, we've got how old is the baby?
She's about 10 weeks. Yeah, I know. I'm crazy to be doing this.
You are. You really are. But we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Yes, you do your best. And if you've got to bail out, we get it. We totally understand.
Appreciate it.
So let's get into it, ladies. Let's get going here in case that little munchkin there on your chest decides that it's a she, right? It's a little girl. Or no?
Little girl. Yeah.
Okay, in case she decides she's done. So let's start talking. We'll start with Amie. Amie, tell us a little bit about your nursing background. Introduce yourself a little bit.
All right. Thank you so much, Jessica and Erica, for having me. So a little bit about myself. So, of course, I'm a nurse. My background is in obstetrical nursing. So that has always been my bread and butter. I've always loved moms and babies. Then I also moved into some various leadership positions. So I was an educator in obstetrics, as well as a professional practice clinician later, a couple years later. Overseeing actually the entire maternal child program until Sara came in, and Sara will kind of chime in on her part. And then I left that role and I actually worked in quality improvement, which was pretty dope. It was out of my wheelhouse because I decided to do something different than obstetrics. I had been doing it for over 10 years and I decided to get into emergency medicine. And I decided to do that in 2019 for quality improvement. So it was not the greatest idea because it was just the pandemic hit, and of course emergency departments were hit hard. So I did that for about 3 years. Then I moved into a health equity role, which again was just so rewarding to be in, to have that space as a nurse to talk about the inequities that we see in healthcare. And of course, I'm a podcaster. I've also moved into media, which is wild. I'm also a freelance journalist with the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, and I've done live radio as a radio columnist as well, and now a new author. So I'm a national best-selling author of The Wisdom of Nurses, which is wild and beyond my wildest dreams. And I'm just so proud to be able to say that I'm a nurse and that I've done this. And of course, I'm also a national speaker as well.
Wow.
Amazing. Impressive.
You can follow up, Sara. Sara, can you follow up with all this?
I know, right?
Of course.
So I am Sara Fung. I'm also a registered nurse since 2007. So it's been a while. I did my final year consolidation in labor and delivery, and then I worked in postpartum level 3 NICU. I then moved into leadership, and that's where I met Amie. So we worked at the same hospital, and I was in a leadership role. So I was a clinical nurse specialist, and then we also worked together in educator type roles in a different organization. And in 2019, that's actually when we started the podcast. So right before the pandemic hit, we're like, hey, we've experienced a lot of crap on the job and a lot of toxic behaviors, and nobody was listening. So we wanted to create a platform where we could talk about it. And that really was how the Gritty Nurse podcast was born. And during that time, I had moved into home and community care as an educator, which was great because I was able to work from home for a lot of the pandemic. And the podcast started to grow, and we started to get more requests from the media. So one thing led to another, and we signed a book deal. And
Wow.
we can talk a little bit more about that, but it was crazy. And then Amie and I were being asked to do all kinds of things, and it was actually during NurseCon that I found out that we hit #1 on the Canadian bestseller list.
What a
And I
great
was
way
like,
to celebrate. That's
yeah,
awesome.
I was like, Amie, I'm like, we're #1, like #1. And she was like, #1. And I was about to start crying. I was like, are you sure? Like, this is beyond what we ever expected. And I think that it's so rewarding that Amie and I can share a lot of the struggles that nurses face now, and people look to us to advocate and really talk about the things that affect nurses.
Erica, you better
Amazing.
get to writing.
No, when's our book
Both of
coming
you,
out?
both of you.
You guys are an inspiration, and I'm so
That's
proud of
awesome.
you. So you mentioned the book. I've got my copy here, which I am almost done reading. It's The Wisdom of Nurses. First, tell everyone where they can get the book, and then I just kind of want to know, how long did it take you to write the book? What was your process?
Sara, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So if you're in the States, you can definitely get it on Amazon. So that's one place to get it. It is an audiobook as well as an ebook. So I know a lot of nurses don't have time to sit down and read. So you can just listen to it as you drive to and from work or whatever else you're doing during the day. If anyone is listening in Canada, you can get it at any of your local bookstores, the main ones and also the independent ones. So it's basically everywhere, I think. And
Okay.
I think it's a really easy read is what I've heard. So it's not going to be a super complicated read. You don't have to research
is.
anything. It's just kind of our stories and other nurses' stories that we wanted to share.
It's kind of funny that you said that. I've heard it's an easy read. Sara rewrote the book, of course. I mean, yeah, like it's definitely something that's really, really. I think what makes it also easy is that it's relatable, right? I think that was the whole point of us writing this, the impetus for writing this book, because there were experiences that myself and Sara had, and we knew that we weren't alone in these experiences, but we kind of wondered why folks didn't talk about them. And again, that public perception of nursing is always wrong. Like they just have this idea. Well, they take it from the media, right? And again, this is where we have to work with our media folks to do much better in terms of how they view nurses. So, they have this perception that either we're the nurse Jackie or the angelic nurse, or, we're these
Right.
various different tropes of nurses. And it's like, well, why don't nurses talk about what nursing actually looks like? So that kind of is also the other part of the book where we're talking about, what does it mean to be a nurse? What does it look like to be a nurse, to kind of change that public perception, and also to let people know that they're not alone. So it's kind of a book for everybody.
That's amazing. I'll let Sara take this next question. What goes into like promoting a book? How have the last 2 months been as far as what's involved? Has it been like crazy busy? Like, are you on interviews? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so I guess for us, because we were with a major publisher, it was a media tour. Like it was crazy. I think Amie can chime in as well, but basically we had the publisher, we had a publicist from the publishing company that lined up all these tours for us, and they really wanted them to be national level tours. So we did things like The Social, which is your version of The View, probably. We did
Wow.
we did The Current, which is like national level radio. We did what's it called? The Good Stuff with Mary Berg, which is this fun cooking show. It's kind of like
Oh, cool.
Rachel, what's her name?
Rachel
Rachel
Ray.
Ray.
Rachel
Rachel
Ray.
Ray, yeah.
Yeah, we did this other one called Your Morning, which is like a major morning show. And it was just nonstop, and we were actually advised we were only allowed to do like major media hits, so they didn't want us doing small stuff because they said,
Wow.
if you're doing small stuff, that means if you're just on this network, they won't want you on again for the book specifically. So we had to keep that in mind. And then we also did something called radio syndication, which is where you basically go on radio stations across the country, like back to back. So Amie and I each did, I think, 10 or 12
Yeah,
12
Oh my
12.
gosh.
in a span of like 3 hours, and you just go back to back, and they have their questions that they're supposed to ask, and then some people go off script, which is always kind of fun, and they just ask you whatever. So
Yeah.
that's and like I had gone out to like buy a new wardrobe because I'm like, I can't wear the same thing every time, like I have to
Right.
mix it up, people are gonna see me, like, so
Yeah.
there was that kind of thing to think about. And my
Yeah.
favorite part actually was the one time we were on The Social, and we had makeup artists, and that was amazing. And I had a
Fun.
very nice gay man do up my face, and it was so fun. I almost didn't want to wash my
Love
face
it.
at the end of the day.
Oh my gosh, I would love that.
That
Treated
sounds
like a rock
amazing,
star.
but also exhausting. And especially Amie,
Mhm.
you had literally just had a baby and you're thrown into this.
Yeah,
Wow.
I would say do not advise. Like, this is probably not words from the wise here, where I was 4 days postpartum
Oh
of a
my
C-section,
God.
going on The
Wow.
Social. So like it was
Girl.
it was wild. I mean, honestly, like, if you have a labor and delivery background, I had a spinal combo CSE, and then I asked them to give me, the anesthesiologist, to give me a pudendal block, so the 2 extra injections in the hips. And I'm like, I will be good to go.
That was
And
smart of
I
you.
don't know, it just kind of seemed to work out. I don't know, my recovery seemed so much easier. But yeah, I was 4 days post-op of a C-section on national TV and national radio.
What a strong
But
lady.
it was
Wow.
wild.
Wild.
That's really,
Absolutely
really
wild.
cool.
But like I said, if you're out there and you're 4 days post-op of a C-section, don't do what I did.
Do not recommend.
Nurses, we are always the worst patients. Seriously.
We are.
We
I
are.
had to ask,
Absolutely.
funny story, I actually had to ask permission from the hospital to leave because, again, like, I was actually quite sick. I had preeclampsia,
Oh my
so
God.
I was in already longer than normal. And they're just like, I don't know if we should let you go. I'm like, okay, I'll go if you give me medical clearance and everything's good. And they're just like, we don't know. But then eventually they did give me medical clearance to go, and then I had to be followed back. Like, I literally went and then went back to the hospital, which
Oh
is
my
wild.
God. They gave you a day pass. Wow. That's
Yeah, they're
crazy.
like, she's gonna be a code yellow if we don't let her go anyways. So let her go in peace and let her come back.
Yeah. That's pretty
Well, one of the things that I loved about your book is you really just hit the ground running right in the very beginning. You start out by saying, we really need a new nursing hero, by calling out Florence Nightingale for what she
Right.
actually was. And you said, quote, a deeply dedicated but also flawed and racist human being who was simply the most prominent nurse of her time. I imagine you have received some criticism from that, because I have talked about this before and I always receive a lot of flack. People don't want to hear anything negative about their beloved Florence Nightingale.
cool.
What has been your experience? Amie, did you want
I would, yeah, sure. I mean, I would say actually our experience has been quite positive. We actually haven't really heard much backlash specifically about the Florence Nightingale. And I think the other thing
Good.
to take away from this is the context of the reality of the situation. We weren't making anything up. She,
Right.
for her time and her period and the things that she thought about, they were racist. She held racist ideas and racist beliefs. Although she had done all these other great pioneering things for nursing, we're just fact telling. We're not making anything up. So for people to get upset, it's just kind of, it begs the question as to why. Why are you getting upset about us talking the truth about this individual? And I think that's more of an internal conversation that other person needs to have. They need to check themselves, because at the end of the
I
day,
agree.
she's not, she's not a god. She's not. And I think this is the thing, right? People are seeing her like she's this deity, she's pious, she's this. And it's like, when you put people on these type of pedestals, it's hard for them to be knocked down. But we have to be honest that she's a fallible human being. She made mistakes. Of course, she pioneered some great things, but there were many nurses during that time that were not highlighted. And we know that history is told by the victors. So again, we need to hear other perspectives, and we just wanted to call it balls and strikes. And that's what we did in the book.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
I
I would say
loved
I
that.
didn't really receive any negative feedback either. I think if anything, people are surprised to hear about other nurses that also did great things, and that's what we wanted to highlight through the book. So we talk about, like throughout the book, there are little vignettes of nurses with grit, and so we talk about other nurses who did equally great things that weren't given the credit that they deserve. And I think that when we initially pitched the book to our publisher and even our agent, we asked them both, "Can you name a famous nurse?" But you can't name Florence Nightingale, and nobody could do it. And
Yeah,
I think a lot of nurses
exactly.
even have trouble thinking of nurses who have done great things other than Florence. And
Right.
like in Canada, we don't do this Nightingale pledge, but we heard that down in the States, you guys do this. And maybe that's where
Not
it comes from.
everywhere. Some nursing
No?
programs do. I think some have started to phase it out, but there are still a lot that do. But it's not across the board. Yeah.
Right.
For
Right.
those that don't know, I don't want to go too deeply into it, but I'm still surprised that so many nurses are not aware of this. Just to give you a little context, there are letters, and they're readily available online, that Florence Nightingale wrote, for example, to the governor of New Zealand, really promoting colonialism and saying things like, if we have to sacrifice some people, then that's a price we have to pay. It's okay. It's there in black and white, basically, right?
Yeah.
If you want
And
to
I
do
think
your
the other,
research.
again, yeah, I think the other piece is like we actually, one of the nurses that we do highlight in her book, her name is Dr. Natalie Sake-Doucette, and she actually wrote a piece called "The Racist Lady of the Lamp," and she dives like right into the history. She talks about those letters as well, and talks about the interaction between Mary Seacole as well
I
as
love Mary
Florence
Seacole.
Nightingale. And
Yeah.
I think these are important things. Like, this is the other part of the history that we have to hear. And whether it's painful to some people, it's kind of too bad. I mean, I don't realize, like,
Right.
it doesn't, it's not going to bother me to hear that there's more than one side of the story. And I think people have to realize that, sorry, sometimes there are truths about people that we might not like, but at the end of the day, it's the truth. And the only way to move forward and to be progressive in nursing is to face those truths and then do something about it. I think that when I think about nursing history and like what I've been taught, the main person that always comes up is Florence Nightingale. And we do need to change that, because there are other people that have done great work other than her as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of it seems like it's a lot of the older generational nurses that seem to get upset. And it's not just Florence Nightingale, but anything that you speak about nursing in a bad light, they get offended. Like, don't make nursing look bad. Well, we're telling the truth. We're speaking
Right.
the truth of what nursing is right now. And so I think it's not just in particular that, it's almost just like anything that you talk about that's puts nursing in a bad light. We have to, fake, they want to say, I don't know, almost like fake it till you make it kind of thing. But I don't know if you feel that way, Erica, too, about that a lot of times it's
It is, and I don't like to generalize, generational differences, but it's actually an area that I'm fascinated in. And I will say that for me, the backlash that I receive on these quote unquote controversial topics tend to disproportionately be an older generation of nurses that really do not want to even entertain the notion that this could be true. They don't even want to have the conversation.
Right.
That's so unfortunate. And I think what you should do, Erica, this is my harsh, gritty nurse report coming out, to be like, send them the hurt feelings report and say, I'm sorry, it's too bad for you. You can go cry in the corner, but change and progress is coming. Like, I see so much in these new nurses that are coming up that they're just like, you know what, I'm sorry that's what you believed. It's kind of too bad. And they move on and they do what's necessary. And at the end of the day, like, yeah, show me your hurt feelings report. I'm cry about it later. I'm still going to do what I need to do and talk about it. And, you could be mad, but I got work to do over here. So
that's right. I like that. I got work to do. All right. I'm going to pick on Sara. Sara, I'm picking on you for this next question. It's not a bad one. It's actually one that, especially Erica holds near and dear to her heart. So there's a chapter in the book about RaDonda Vaught's case. And you described the rally outside the courthouse the day of her sentencing. Erica and myself were both there that day, and it was a pivotal day, I would say, for the nursing profession. It was a huge, huge day. What ramifications do you think that RaDonda's case had in Canada? And pivoting off of that, have there ever been any nurses that have been criminally prosecuted in Canada, similar to what
Yeah, I think
RaDonda
there's
had?
a lot of similarities between the Canadian and American, not just the healthcare system, but how nurses are viewed. And I think that a lot of times when there's a system problem, we often blame the last person, like the last point of contact before the patient, and it's always the nurse. Like there were a whole host of issues I think that contributed to what happened, but everything got pinned on RaDonda. And
Mhm.
like I think we saw a lot of that, and there was a lot of fear, I think, just knowing that, you know, this could have happened to me. And it actually makes me think of a case that you might not know, but a lot of Canadian nurses know. And Amie, you'll know this nurse's name, Elizabeth Wettlaufer. So she was
I
a
read
nurse
about
that,
her.
yeah, so like she was actually the most prolific female serial killer, I think, in Canada. She had killed a
Mm.
total of 14 patients. This was before the pandemic, though. This was like, I think she was convicted in 2016 or 2017. And she was tried criminally. It was a big deal in Canada because this doesn't happen often. And she actually killed a lot of her patients using insulin.
Mm.
And the only reason she was even caught was because she confessed to her psychiatrist, where in Canada, if someone confesses to murdering someone, you legally have to report that. So the
Wow.
scariest thing is that she wouldn't even have been caught if it wasn't for this confession to another
Wow.
healthcare professional. And so I think, again, there's like a lot of fear because there appear to be nurses that kind of fall through the cracks and things that they should be held accountable for. They're not always held accountable to.
Absolutely. Amie, you guys recently had on the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Wow, first of all. But what was that experience like for you guys?
It was wild. I've actually had the fortunate aspect of meeting him more than once. So I actually held a national COVID-19 panel where I was one of the moderators, and he was, of course, the Prime Minister of Canada talking about COVID-19. But I was one of the moderators for that panel, so I got to meet him then. And we actually met him at ICN, so the International Council of Nurses, and that was back in Montreal, I believe, 2023. It was very random. We got a text message. The chief nursing officer was like, "Hey, do you want to meet the Prime Minister of Canada?" And we're like, "Yes." And then I actually also got another message on my LinkedIn from one of his security folks that are like, "Meet in this clandestine area." And me and Sarah like, "Oh my God, we got to try to, it's like go to this corner and do this." And we're like, "Okay." So we did that. But then it was such a treat to have him reach out to us, or his team reach out to us, to talk about issues nationally about nursing for Nursing Week. And it's crazy because, I mean, we shouldn't be nervous because he's a human. He eats and breathes and poops just like we do. But of
Right.
course, it's like, oh my God, we have a moment here to talk about real issues related to nursing with the Prime Minister of Canada. And of course, I'll be honest, we actually got a little bit of backlash. And I think I know you probably have heard some drama out there about what's happened here with like the truckers and things like that, and COVID-19. And there's people that have these like F Trudeau flags flying all over the place. It's wild. But I mean, at the end of the day, what you want to do is to be able to speak to your issues with a federal leader, whether you agree with their politics or not. And we had this opportunity, and it was just so rewarding to sit down to say, hey, it's not even just a seat at the table. We literally had voice and agency to say, here's some of the things that we have questions about from a national and federal perspective. What can you, as the leader of Canada, do to help support nurses? So it was really cool to sit down with him. He was actually really funny. I think Sara had mentioned we didn't know what to call him. So of course, unfortunately, we didn't get this on our outtakes, but we asked like, hey, what should we call you? And he's like, you can call me like your leader, your JT. We were chuckled about that. Of course, we sucked to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau because we were just like, no, we're not doing this. But it was a really, really rewarding experience, and I really hope that more nurses have the opportunity to speak to their leaders. Like, I hope that you guys have an opportunity to speak to Joe Biden and whatnot, to talk about
Can you
national
imagine?
nursing issues.
That'd be amazing.
Oh my
You should
gosh.
do it. I'm sure.
Erica,
Yeah.
write
Just
him a
reach
letter
out.
right now. Reach out.
You know what? It's this is where I say that there's the power of social media, because we tweet at our government officials all the time, and maybe you think that they're not listening, but every once in a while, they probably do see that message and actually will reach out. Because we were tweeting, I think, during Nursing Week that, we want to speak to political leaders. And it just so happened that, like, I think it was like the Wednesday. Was it the Wednesday, Sarah, they reached out, or the Tuesday?
It was the Tuesday, because we had just finished giving a talk at a different organization. We were on the phone with his publicist or whatever, and then other people were listening at the talk that we had just did in excitement. And then when they heard that he had agreed to come on, they were like doing a happy dance in the background, because they're just so excited for us that we had this opportunity. I have gotten, I wouldn't say backlash, but people have said things to me like, oh, when you met him in person, why didn't you throw a glass of water in his face? And it's like, I don't have to agree with everything he says, but I need to treat the prime minister of my country with respect if I'm going to have a conversation that's going to go anywhere. So I think that there's these keyboard warriors that, they say, why don't you do this and do that? It's like, well, you didn't have that opportunity. And I'm sure if it was you wouldn't do that. Like, you're just spewing words right now.
We had a little bit of the same when we recently interviewed the CNO of the American Nurses Association. There were people that thought we should have just, I don't know, sat there and screamed at her and
or really berated
what is
her,
that
like
going to
accomplish? Where would that get you, though, right? That wouldn't get you anywhere.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're going to be professional and ask the hard questions, but yeah, we're not going to get ugly about it.
Right. And people do find this story funny, where I always say that I never turn my nursing brain off, because I wrote about this in the book too, that I noticed that he had really good veins when I shook his hand. And that kind of stuck with me. And I'm always assessing people's veins, right? It's just something that I just can't stop doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess I have the next question. British Columbia's Ministry of Health recently, in March of 2024, became the first province to implement minimum nurse-to-patient ratios in 6 acuity areas. That's a huge step forward. Do you think that there is going to be hope that there will be more mandated nurse-to-patient ratios? We'll let Amie take this one, if you want to, Amie.
Yeah, no, I always believe that there will be some hope, right? I think the conversations happening at a national level, like we're seeing, like the Canadian Federation of Nursing Unions talking about staffing ratios. Probably the biggest push that we have right now is our Chief Nursing Officer of Canada. Her name is Dr. Lee Chapman, and she has pretty much developed a toolkit. I should say it was her in conjunction with many other nurses all across Canada, which is called the Nursing Retention Toolkit. And one of the biggest things that came out of it was talking about having a national strategy for patient safety ratios. So again, I think hopefully BC will be the province that kind of gets the ball rolling, and that we all kind of start looking towards. I know there's some other provinces that are starting to talk and move in terms of seeing mandated staffing ratios, but again, this is something we need. So I am hopeful. I really hope that we'll see some change. Again, another plug to the Prime Minister, if he listens to this episode, we need national nursing ratios. But yeah, like I'm hopeful, because I think usually once we get one going, we can probably get the rest on board, because this is something that is well needed. We know why we need patient staffing ratios. It's because we're drowning. The administrators know that we are really good as nurses with working with less. We're just really innovative. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to patient safety, we shouldn't be compromising on patient safety, and we need the right staff to do the right job.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so funny how similar the US and Canada are, like, in that, as far as like it's just starting to kind of, well, I mean, not enough, but you're just starting to get people to kind of jump on, and like you're saying, hopefully, like it's the same thing in the US, there'll be more states to follow. If not everybody at the same time, that'd be even better.
Yeah, we need a groundswell, right? We need people to start, like Sara said in the episode previous, that we need people to start speaking about it and talking about it, and generating like angst around it, and be like, this is why we need this, and bothering our politicians, and knocking on doors and letting people know that it's a patient safety issue. And I think that the more we continue to talk about it, the more that we'll have other folks advocating for us too, to kind of see that change.
Definitely.
I have a lot of Canadian nurses that reach out to me, and there are similarities definitely between nursing in our two countries. but there's also, I think, some differences. And I thought it'd be interesting to kind of delve into some of that if you guys can speak to it, either one of you. So your nursing college governs your nursing license the same way that our Board of Nursing governs ours. But I've heard and read that the Canadian Nursing College is not accountable to any governing body, kind of the same way that our US boards of nursing lack accountability. But as Canadian nurses, if you're facing a licensure complaint, you can be forced into signing a non-disclosure agreement, whether you want to or not. And then you're not permitted to discuss the complaint or the investigation or the outcome at all, which is a bit different than here in the US, where we are typically free to still discuss those things. Is that true? And can you speak to that, Sara?
Or did you sign a non-disclosure already? No, I'm just kidding.
No,
I
no, we
signed
haven't.
nothing.
No, we haven't. No. So the first thing is that so depending on what province or territory you live in, you're only accountable to that board. So for example, Amie and I live in Ontario, so we're accountable to the College of Nurses of Ontario. But everything kind of works in silos. Like it's just like if every state had its own board, right? That's kind of like how it is with us. And so they can kind of set their own parameters, so to speak. And in terms of complaints, I mean, they are listed. So if there's a complaint against you and there's an action taken, let's say your license was suspended or even revoked, that is publicly available knowledge. So it gets printed in their quarterly magazine. It's up on the website. So if someone were to search your name, for example, if you were to search up Elizabeth Wettlaufer, you would see that she was convicted of murder and her license has been permanently revoked. So that kind of stays with you. But you don't really get to tell your side of the story. Like, I'm not saying in her case she should tell her side of the story, but if there was a complaint, it's very much what is official documentation. There's no real way for you to share your side of the story. So if an employer, let's say, were to look you up and they see this, they're going to not want to hire you, right? There's no real room for your interpretation or your explanation for it.
Yeah, and maybe just to jump in there with what Sarah's mentioned, there is a good colleague of ours that has faced discipline from the CNO again. So, like you said, they're not responsible to any governing body, but their whole issue is to protect the public. That's what's documented on the CNO's website. So again, it's just like people have to understand that the College of Nurses of Ontario is. Yes, they're our governing body, but they don't protect us. They protect the public. So this particular nurse, she had been disciplined, and it was kind of crazy, her situation. And I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but essentially it was, again, the same things that we talked about in terms of violence on the job, where actually I believe there was an interaction between her and another patient, and then she was disciplined for it. But yeah, like pretty much she can't say anything. Like nothing.
Wow.
And the thing is, we should be talking about violence on the job,
Absolutely.
but she can't say a word. She's completely bound by whatever arbitrations that they had, whatever documents that they signed, and she can't say anything. And I think it's actually a shame, because we should hear her story. We should hear what happened to her, because what happened to her was a tragedy. Like I think about working in the emergency department and seeing how many, for example, we have these things called the internal reporting system. So that's where people will write in, if there's a fall or if there's, violence or whatever the case may be, and seeing how many times nurses were hit like in the emergency department. And it was wild. And the fact that we can't hear from people who might have been attacked or hurt, who then maybe retaliate back or, say something back or whatever the case may be, I think it's a huge issue. And I think that, we need to, although we have these things in place, this is why we need to like push for different accountabilities from the CNO and to say, hey, we should see something different. Why is, if this person wants to tell their story, why are they bound? They can't. And I think these are questions we should ask, because again, I think her story is probably a similar story to many other nurses, and she can't even talk about it.
Wow. I agree completely. And it is the same here in the US, where our boards of nursing operate in a silo, and their mission is to protect the public, not nurses. So we do have that in common.
So piggybacking on the violence, since that was our next question anyways, We have a high risk, obviously, of gun violence here in the U.S., which is absolutely ridiculous. I'm assuming Canada's is way, way, way less compared to the U.S., but I'm sure that you and other nurses have dealt with workplace violence, whether it be verbal or physical abuse. How do you feel that that is being addressed? Like, as far as how is that being handled? Is there a mission to help with reporting or help with decreasing the amount?
I'll say that our rate of gun violence is probably lower, but it is
Yeah.
high enough that we have a code in the hospitals. A lot of hospitals have a code
Mm.
silver. So that
Yeah,
is a
we have
code for
that.
if someone brings a firearm into the hospital and, you know, what to do if that happens. So it's not unheard of. Like, there have been cases of domestic violence where a former partner will walk in to the
Mm.
facility with a gun and shoot someone.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that has happened. What I think happens a lot more, and maybe this is true in the States too, is nurses deal with a lot of violence from patients and from family members, whether it be verbal or physical abuse. And we're
Mhm.
not taught what to do. So the only thing I was ever taught was to call a code if someone was to get violent, but we're taught not to fight back. We're taught to just let the abuse happen. A lot of times nurses have to go back to care for the same patients that just attacked them, or
Yes.
nurses are
Yep.
being asked, what did you do to cause it? What could you have done differently? Instead of trying to actually protect the nurses. And I found a
Sounds familiar.
statistic recently that nurses are at higher risk of violence than police officers.
Wow.
So if you think about that, that is
Wow.
incredibly high. And why are we not talking about this? And what, like, who is protecting us? And I feel like this is part of the whole retention issue too, why nurses are leaving,
Mhm.
because who wants to go to a job where you feel like you could literally be attacked? And if you even try to fight back, that you might lose your job. Because we've
Yeah.
heard of nurses where that has happened, right? Like, they fight back and then they're told, oh, it's fine, we'll protect you. And then they get fired.
Mhm. It sounds
Yeah.
very similar to the U.S.
Yeah, we don't really have a lot put in place to help support us or protect us. Again, femicide is a huge issue within our profession too. There's like actually one unsolved case. It's been many, many years of a nurse who essentially was followed home from her job in Orangeville and was murdered. Still nothing
Oh.
on that. And even just recently, unfortunately, this nurse wasn't, she was murdered by her spouse. And again, we see these issues within our profession and there's nothing put in place to protect us. And again, I think about some of the resources that they say. It's like, oh, you know, gentle persuasion approach. Well, how can I gently persuade this person who's wielding a weapon
Right.
to stop them from hurting me? Or, you know, there's other techniques that they say, you know, different holding techniques. It's like, okay, no, at the end of the day, my job is actually to go home to my family. That's
Yes.
actually what your job is as a nurse. Yes,
Thank
you
you.
take care of patients, but your job is at the end of the day to still come back to look after your family or your friends or your loved ones, whoever that is. Like, us being a nurse doesn't encapsulate our whole entire being. And I think some people kind of take that on and be like, oh, we have to do everything and be everything for everyone, but then we don't protect ourselves. And one of the most interesting things I heard is Sara and I actually went out to do a speaking engagement, and they were talking about, you know, violence on the job and occupational health and safety kind of being involved. And this one occupational health and safety specialist kind of asked the group of nurses, and this was at like I think it was like a national nursing forum that they were speaking to all these nurses across Canada, and was like, if you're in a situation of violence and you're being, you know, you're being attacked, who is the most important person in the room? And 90% of them said the patient. And
Oh,
that is crazy. It's like
yeah.
you are being harmed, and at the end of the day, you still believe that the patient is the most important person in the room.
That
Again, I
speaks
think this is
volumes.
just
Yeah.
right. And I think that speaks volumes to our profession, like how we
Yeah.
think about ourselves and how we view ourselves. And that really needs to change. And we need to make that change from inside, so we change administrators' minds, because they think we're disposable too.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
at the end of the day, we have to do better for ourselves. And please don't, like, if you're listening out there, don't ball yourself up into a corner and have someone beat on you. You have to think about yourself at the end of the day
Right.
and keeping
Fight
yourself
back.
safe. And we have to think more about who we are as individuals versus this collective identity that we are as nursing, right? So stronger legislation is always something I push for. I'm bringing that attention and awareness to families and patients too, that this is something that happens. And again, like I said, we need to push for accountability from our leadership teams, because they sit back and they're happy to replace us, right? You get hurt on the job, another nurse will come in and replace you. You get murdered, they will replace you.
Yep.
So we have to think about how we need to keep ourselves safe as well.
There's such a fear with nurses and of getting in trouble. Like,
yes.
And it goes along with not just workplace violence, but everything. There's always just this fear. And, it's like, if we're not taught and we're not trained by our leaders that it's okay to fight back, or it's okay to get yourself out of the situation, or we're always worried about that we're going to do the wrong thing because nobody's teaching us what the right thing to do is, and it's awful. It needs to be fixed. Like, it should have been fixed. This is crazy that we're still having this conversation.
Yeah, and I wonder also if nurses are afraid to say that they want to put themselves first. Like the 90% of nurses that said patient, I wonder if they truly believe that, or they said what they thought someone wanted to hear.
What they've been taught.
All we're ever taught is like, you need to care for your patient, you need to do everything for your patient, but actually you need to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your patient. And we should be okay with saying that we want to put ourselves first. And I don't think we all are. And especially as women, as parents, as a group that I will say a lot of times is oppressed, we feel like we can't say that we're number one.
Right.
Absolutely. Let's talk about one of my favorite subjects, unions, and compare
Look at
Canada.
her smile. Look at her smile. Come on.
I know. I love it.
Woo! Unions and strikes. Let's get into it.
That's right. That's right. So unions in Canada versus in the US, approximately 90% of nurses in Canada are unionized, which is amazing. That sounds amazing. But I'm told time and again by Canadian nurses that they feel the unions there are weak, and that they're heavily influenced by the government. And for example, that it's illegal for nurses to go on strike. Is that true? Can you speak to some of that, Sara?
It is. So yes, I would say 90% or more of Canadian nurses are unionized, and it actually depends on where you are hired. So if you accept a job at a facility that is unionized, you are unionized whether you want to be or not. So it's like, if you don't want to be, then you need to find an organization that's not unionized. So I think that their unions do a lot of great things. Like, I think personally, I wasn't aware of how great they were until I went to a job that wasn't unionized.
Yes.
So we almost take it for granted. But I will say, like, depending on which geographical area you live in, some are definitely stronger than others. That is true. And I also think that in Canada, there is only so much a union can do as well. So you're right, we can't strike. We did an episode about that already, because we're considered essential workers. So it's not like we're part of, I don't know, UPS or some mail delivery service where you could go on strike and people would not die. So unfortunately, we can't strike, and that does limit a lot of our power.
It does. Yeah, that's
and
unfortunate.
maybe I'll add to that. So like Sara said, the right to strike for nurses varies depending on the type of workplace. So nurses in hospitals, long-term care facilities, for example, are prohibited from withdrawing their services. So like no strike, no lockout, because they're deemed essential service from the government. But there have been work stoppages, and there has actually been a recent strike. And I think again, it really depends on what province you are. So Quebec nurses are made completely different. They're a different breed of nurses altogether. They actually had a strike in 2023. So they joined a massive public strike with other union workers, and they were on strike for 4 days. And of course, they got results. But again, like I said, the Quebec nurses are a different breed of nursing altogether.
Yeah, and let me just interject though. So like, just because it's illegal to strike doesn't mean you can't. So you can technically you could still strike. It would just be illegal, and you would be risking massive fines and being sued. So it's not like you literally can't strike. It's just that there's a lot on the line, and whether or not your union can handle the fallout, that's the piece that I think holds a lot of people back.
And it's again, it's dependent on what's written in your collective agreement. So clearly the Quebec nurses have that they can strike and they
Okay.
can do this. So it's what's in your bargaining union. So like, for example, in ONA, so the Ontario Nurses Association, no strike, no lockout. But they might do protests, or they might, do things like that. But you can't, but they, I should say again, legally, they can't strike, but they could. I mean, you could always have a walkout. It's just you'd have, like Sara said, you'd have to pay fines. So again, it's just dependent on what your collective bargaining says. We don't have one single union. We have because we have so many different provinces and territories, each province and territory has a different union. And then again, it gets even more complicated because, for example, our nurse practitioners are in one, or I think they'd call them LPNs out there. So registered practical nurses here, they're in a different union. And then different provinces have different rules. So BC has one union for all of nurses, which is, it's crazy. Like, we should probably have something a little bit more standardized in terms of our approach. I think that would actually be much more powerful. And I think, again, we should be learning from other nurses that have the ability to strike, like the Quebec Nurses Association. They are such a powerful group. They're a very grassroots, very organic, very advocacy based form of nursing out there, which I think we all definitely need. But again, I think we need to look at what the college says too, right? So some of the language in, the college, the people who hold our license, makes it more fearful for nurses to strike too, because there's a whole, what are my accountabilities during a strike? And again, I think some of the language in there would make nurses feel, oh, I can't do this. But again, I think we need to have different conversations with ourselves. And if it's about patient safety, then what are we really doing? I think we're just doing a disservice if we're just going to sit back and do nothing.
Yeah, I agree with that. So I think we've got 2 questions left. So I'll take one, and then Erica, you can pick. Well, we actually had a few more, but for time purposes, let's hone in on 2. Let's talk social media, since we all are in social media. Sara, I'll direct this one towards you. What can nurses get away with as far as posting on social media in Canada? Is there backlash, or will you get in trouble if you speak out? Is there anything that will happen to your license? Or can you just speak freely? I don't know. How does that work?
I think the first thing is that nurses are allowed to post on social media. So I want to just clear that up right now. We are allowed to be on social media. We are allowed to post. Where I think people get really concerned, though, is, what to post. What am I allowed to post? So this is where it gets a little bit gray, right? Because I think as long as you are posting professionally and you're not posting misinformation, we have the right to post whatever we want. And Amie and I are on social media and we post, obviously. So I think nurses' biggest fears always are, I'm going to lose my license, I'm going to lose my job. And so what we tend to do, I think if you just look at it from an organization's perspective, their biggest fear is that you are going to say something that is going to damage their reputation. That's their number one fear. It's not really so much whether or not you post. It's they don't want you to say something that is going to hurt them or give them bad publicity. So I never personally post about organizations I've worked at. I don't talk about where I've worked in the past. I really think it's more about systems issues. So yes, I'm going to be posting about the nursing shortage and retention issues. And if there's a protest that's going to help nurses' working conditions, I'll always post about that. So I think this is where nurses need to understand that part of our responsibility as nurses is to advocate for our patients and better working conditions. And social media is the perfect way to do it in this day and age. How many people can you talk to versus you make a post and it reaches thousands or even tens of thousands of people or millions even. It would take years to talk to millions of people to even have that same effect.
True. Yeah.
Social media is powerful. That's for sure.
It is.
Yeah. And I'd say I'm probably a little bit more edgy than Sara. I just pretty much recently told said something about our premier about what the F is he doing in terms of, wanting more beer versus healthcare. And I think it's just, how would I add to this for nurses who might be fearful to post? I think at the end of the day, it's about truth telling, right? Like I said, calling balls and strikes. And I think at the end of the day, if you're truth telling, you're speaking your truth, you're speaking from your experience, I can't see how you can go wrong. But of course, there are organizations. Oh gosh, she's popping out. There are organizations and people out there that will try to threaten you, will try to put you in a place to say, you know, you can't say this and you can't say that. And I'll be honest, the call usually comes from inside the house. It's usually nurses. So it's usually nurses who are like, how dare you say that? You can't do this. And it's just like, shut that voice up. And
thank you.
Let's do some collective work here, because I'm not saying this to hurt nursing. I'm saying this to help our profession.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it's always the call. Like whenever there's backlash, it's usually other nurses and not the general public.
It's true. Like even one of the chapters in our book, one of the nurses received a complaint from her own coworker who took it up to management to complain about her chapter in our book. And, you know, it even went through like the legal team on the publishing department. And so we're like, what is going on? Why are you not supporting your colleague? Why are you reporting your colleague when they haven't done anything wrong? And everything was de-identified. Like all her stories, some of them were even combined so that they wouldn't be identifiable. So I feel like nursing has a lot of work to do within ourselves.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Pharmacists in Canada now are seeing patients, prescribing treatments and medications in an effort to offload the pressure in the ERs. And in at least one Canadian province, in Ontario, I've read recently that RNs are now able to prescribe certain medications after completing some additional competencies. Can you speak to that? Has there been any issues with that, or has it been pretty well received?
I'm laughing.
The pharmacy piece. I know. I'll speak to the pharmacy piece. I know a lot of pharmacists are not happy with this additional responsibility, first of all, because they already felt overworked to begin with. One of my friends is actually a pharmacy assistant, and she left after 25 years on the job because of the workload. So I can only imagine what pharmacists are feeling now that they have this added responsibility of prescribing medications. And I think that I don't believe they received an increase in pay, if I'm not mistaken. It was just another thing added to their plate. And so it's another band-aid solution to fix the actual solution, which is that there is a physician and a nurse shortage. And a lot of the emergency departments in like across Ontario are closed due to staff shortages. So sometimes you literally have to question whether it's open before you even drive there, like especially in some of the smaller towns. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe I'm laughing because I think always, you know, at the end of the day, there's always one group that is going to be mad about anybody doing anything.
Yeah.
You know where I'm going, right?
Oh, yes.
So like physicians are not happy about nurses prescribing. Physicians aren't happy about pharmacists having this ability. But again, we're talking about a monopoly here. You can't have a monopoly and hope that the system will change when we're seeing it crumbling. We have to look at other solutions. These are other solutions. Would I say that they're working 100% efficiently, effectively? No. But I think at the end of the day, we have to get creative with the way that we're doing these. If we're seeing that, you know, there's this unprecedented number of people who don't have access to primary care, or, you know, someone just needs their medication refilled, but to go book an appointment with their family doctor, they're not going to see them for 4 weeks. Like we just need to make it make sense.
Right.
And, you know, physicians will forever be mad about nurses doing anything over and above what they think is our scope. But again, times are changing. People are going to have several seats, and it's time for change. At the end of the day, we need to be, who's the most important people that we're servicing? It's our patients. If we can't get on board for our patients, then what are we doing this work for? What did you go to med school for? What did you go to nursing school, or, you know, whatever? And if we can't see that, you know, the model that we're currently having, the medical model, or these various different models aren't working, we have to change them. And sorry if folks that might get mad at me for saying this, we just need to see change. If the model that we have currently is not working, go cry about it somewhere else. The goal is to, you know, service as many patients and families and see better healthcare outcomes. And if that means changing who's providing it, who's delivering the service, then I'm okay with that too.
Yeah. You don't make progress, to clarify, and you don't make things better. Yeah. Unless you change, you have to.
It's only certain classifications of medications that nurses can. It's like over the counter,
it's very
and contraceptives,
narrow, it's very specific.
Epi, for an allergic reaction, right? It's things like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not.
Yeah.
We're not going out and being like, "Here's your diazepam," and like,
Right.
it
Or-
still is making sense, right?
Yeah.
You're not gonna.
Yeah.
I just think some people have power and control issues, and
Mhm.
they're gonna have to get over it for the sake of our patients.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, Erica, do you have an enema to give away this week? We have the Enema of the Week award. What is
You
it?
know I do.
Yes.
This week's Enema Award goes to none other than Vanderbilt Medical Center in Nashville, Tennessee, because
Woo!
they just had, yeah, give it up for Vanderbilt. They just had their third attack against an employee in under a month. So just a couple
Wow.
days ago, a nurse was allegedly sexually assaulted in the bathroom by a patient after she took the patient in there to take a shower.
Oh,
And
gosh.
luckily, another employee came in and, stopped it before anything escalated too much. Back on May 11th, there was the alleged rape of a tech in the garage, the parking garage there. And back on April 26th, there was another person assaulted in the waiting room. But here's why they're really getting the Enema Award.
Why?
Are you
What
ready?
is it?
Are you ready for their
I'm ready.
response? Okay.
Oh, gosh, what?
They allegedly have started offering whistles to employees to
That's
combat. Mm-hmm. Whistles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is just, I can tell you where to shove
impressive.
that whistle.
Way to step it up there, Vanderbilt. Allegedly.
Yeah. That was just, that metal detectors,
Who needs that when you got a
whistles.
whistle?
Let's just do a
Whistles.
whistle. All right. Well, enjoy your enema, Vanderbilt. Well deserved.
Well, ladies, thank you so much for
Yes.
joining us. We would love to have you back on in the future. There are so many things we could keep talking about. But tell everyone where they can find you together and
Yes.
individually.
All right, Sarah, you take it away.
Yeah, you can find the Gritty Nurse podcast if you just Google Gritty Nurse podcast, or you go to our website, which is grittynurse.com. And our podcast is available on all the major platforms. So Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio. We've got a YouTube channel. And then individually, I do have a website. It's sarafung.com. So Sara, no H, FUNG.com. You can find me there. I'm also on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, all the major platforms. So that's where you can find me, and I'll let Amie tell people where they can find her.
So I also have a website, and it's so long. It's AmieArchibald-Varley.com. But I think if you type in AmieVarley.com, it'll work as well. I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, as well as Twitter. That's probably the space that you'll find me most in. I am a disturber and disruptor in that space.
love it.
So come and join me on Twitter. I know it's hot. It's been hot garbage since Elon took over.
Yes.
But there's still some really great people on there. So that's where most likely you'll find me. But you can find me through any of those different aspects and channels.
And to our listeners, please pick up a copy of The Wisdom of Nurses. It's a great book. Like they said in the beginning, it is an easy read, and I'm learning a lot from it. I'm so impressed with you guys. Your
thanks.
advocacy is needed everywhere. So thank you for what you
Thank
do.
you.
Smart
Thank you.
ladies. Thank you guys
Thank you for
coming
having
on.
us.
Till next time on the next Nurses Uncorked.